different? It's not just college. I mean, it's home.
It shouldn't feel no different. It's another game. I'm just playing at home, in front of my family and friends. That's all. It's exciting to play in front of those guys. That's why emotions can be high. That's about it.
Louisiana food. I'm sure it's not like beignets for you or certain something that you have to get when you're in Louisiana.
I'm gonna get a voodoo roll, like stuff with shrimp, crawfish roll, and other sauces. So.
All right, we are back on Love Hate Thursday.
Yeah, a lot of hard-hitting questions there.
Yeah.
Some top-notch journalists there in New Orleans.
Indeed.
Or in Cincinnati.
Yep.
Asking JaMarr Chase, that's whose voice you just heard, asking JaMarr Chase, what are you going to order when you go back home to Louisiana?
The tough questions. I can also confirm to the viewers and listeners that Matthew just spent the 2-minute break confirming to me that he was actually an incredible tennis player and likened himself to Bob Nepper, who in Major League Baseball was the 1981 NL Comeback Player of the Year. So, shout out.
Bob Nepper was like just a junk pitcher. Like he was just a guy that like I said,
Like
I
R.A.
was the equivalent. R.A. Perfect example. I was the equivalent of a guy that like you're like, well, this guy's he's got the worst stuff out there.
Yeah.
And then you look up and he's gone 7 2/3.
Yep.
He's given up 3 hits,
Yep.
1 walk, and 0 earned runs. Like everyone would play me and they'd be like, you're not any good. Like you just push it like no big serve, no
Yep.
nothing. And then you look up and you're like, oh, I just won 6-2, 6-1. And like
6 out of 10 of everything, 10 out of 10 for Kobe mentality.
I had the Mamba mentality before it existed.
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump into Love Hate. JaMarr Chase, we've heard from. He is on the love list despite being maybe the most underwhelming top wide receiver pick.
It's been a little bit disappointing. You know, I think he's wide receiver 16 on the season. So he's been fine.
That's okay.
But he's not. You drafted him as a top 3 guy, and
Yep.
you certainly wish you had Stephon Diggs or Debo or some of the other guys that went a little bit after him. He's going back to Louisiana. So that was the they just talked to him as locker and the hard-hitting questions. Like, what are you going to order? Like at that point, just hang up your journalism degree. What are you doing? At that point, just, I got nothing. Come on. At that point, whoever asked that question, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, you got 10 minutes in front of the guy's locker after practice. Could you ask anything?
Yeah.
You know.
About food.
Anyway, what kind of food? Where are you going to go? Voodoo rolls, right?
Voodoo
Whatever.
rolls. I don't know what that is.
At any rate, he is going back to Louisiana. Obviously, he played his college ball at LSU with Joe Burrow, so a homecoming for both of them. And LSU in Baton Rouge, not New Orleans, but it's all the state of Louisiana. I don't want
someone comes at you for that?
Well, there's grammar police, and then there's geography police.
Yeah.
There's a lot of police on Twitter.
Yeah.
On the Twitter. So I just want everyone to be aware that I know where LSU is. And I will say that I think this is a good matchup. The Saints overall have a pretty good defense, but you can beat them deep, Jay. Only one team in the NFL has allowed more deep passes than the New Orleans Saints this year. They've allowed the 5th most deep receptions to opposing wide receivers as well. They give up 14.3 yards per reception. That's 5th most in the NFL. Overall, they've given up the 8th most yards to wide receivers. You think about what DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett did to them last week. 3 touchdowns, 192 yards. And so JaMarr Chase, who comes in here, and the other thing is, by the way, Marshawn Lattimore missed practice yesterday for the Saints. He's either going to be less than 100% healthy or he's going to miss this game, which would certainly be a boon to the fantasy prospects of JaMarr Chase, especially, by the way, if T. Higgins is less than 100%, which sort of still seems like he is.
Yep. So it sounds like you're buying low on Chase. Now's the time to put in a trade offer for him. Because I think that with Chase, like, teams have adjusted, like, they're shading safeties over more to him. But at some point, like, talent is just unguardable. And there's too many other guys on that team where they're going to figure it out at some point. Quarterback's too good. He's too good. And like you said, Saints been bad against deep passes. Yeah. They're missing Marcus Williams. Lattimore, even if he does play, hasn't been up to his usual standards. So Bengals 2-point favorites in that game. So the mark is expecting they'll turn it around a little bit in New Orleans. Now, Marquise Brown, who is seeing Cooper Kupp-type volumes, averaging 12 targets per game the past month, and he's on the love list, like many people will be against the Seahawks.
To your point, 55 targets this season. That's tied for the second most among wide receivers, Jay. Through 5 games. Through 5 games, I think people would be surprised to learn that Marquise Brown is the 7th best wide receiver in fantasy football. He's now had 3 straight games with over 20 fantasy points. Doesn't feel like anyone's talking about him, sort of weirdly under the radar for a guy that has been that good and that productive. Double-digit targets now in 4 straight games, and the reason we mention the targets and we keep harping on how many targets he's getting is that wide receivers that have faced the Seahawks and have gotten at least 6 targets are averaging 15.5 fantasy points per game. Marquise Brown is a top 6 wide receiver for me this week. Remember, last week before DeAndre Hopkins shows back up.
Yep, I was just going to say, I think now is the time to trade Marquise Brown. Maybe there's someone in your league who's not paying that much attention, who's just kind of forgotten about the existence of DeAndre Hopkins, who's just about to come back and is he's not going to average 12 targets a game the rest of the season.
By the way, I also think this is, as I kick the sign here, I just stretched out my leg. I also think this is a time to trade DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah,
I think his perceived value is higher than what it actually will be.
Yep.
So right now, like, hey, he's coming back next week. Oh, DeAndre Hopkins. Like, there's a chance DeAndre Hopkins is like a rich man's version of Allen Robinson.
Wow.
Like, he's slow.
Wow.
I mean, like, I mean by this what I mean by this. No. I loved DeAndre Hopkins is one of my favorite players in the NFL. I love DeAndre Hopkins. All I'm saying is that he slowed down last year towards the end of the year.
He did.
He slowed down to this Arizona offense is not clicking on all cylinders, and maybe DeAndre Hopkins shows up and it all gets better, or maybe there's just real flaws with Kingsbury's system here, and so I'm just saying that DeAndre Hopkins is probably going to be given how much they spread the ball around, DeAndre Hopkins is probably going to be like a fine wide receiver too. Yeah. Last year he was really touchdown dependent, but his perception is kind of like as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver, and I don't know that he's going to be, given Ertz and Hollywood Brown, and they want to get Rondell Moore involved, and the offense doesn't look great. Like, I think he's more wide receiver 2 than wide receiver 1, and that's what I meant by the Allen Robinson thing, just like that the expectations won't meet the production.
Yep, just everyone, I think, in the fantasy world.
Rich man's.
Yes, yeah, good caveat. Because I think everyone just freaks out when they hear the name Allen Robinson. Triggers bad flashbacks to everything he's done this year. I do think that DeAndre Hopkins, I think Marquise Brown is clearly the guy you'd want in Arizona over Hopkins. I think some people might still the name of DeAndre Hopkins triggers, the thought that he's in that Justin Jefferson Cooper Kupp tier, which he's clearly a long way from. Now, Tyler Lockett, another guy in that game, he's had a minimum of 76 receiving yards 4 weeks in a row. He's kind of become the guy for Geno Smith, the suddenly elite Geno Smith, and he's on the love list against Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, through the last 4 weeks, he's the 7th best wide receiver in fantasy. He's averaging 19.2 fantasy points per game over that stretch. At least 5 receptions, at least 75 yards in every single game over the last 4. And matchup-wise, Arizona can't stop anyone. I mean, right? I mean, the Cardinals are bottom 12 in the NFL in terms of pass defense so far this year. Last season, he absolutely murdered them. 21.3 fantasy points per game in 2 games against the Cardinals last year, with at least 95 yards in both games. So, yeah, give me Tyler Lockett as a top 15 play this week. He comes in at wide receiver 13 in my ranks. Okay,
next guy is Gabe Davis, who, for anyone who vaguely follows football, will know that he had quite a game, and you called it. How do you feel when you get one of those right? You feel, is it relief? Is it like, I'm Keith Hernandez? Is it that kind of vibe?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of gloating, but it's also a little bit of relief. Okay. And it's also like, I hope they remember that call and not the crappy one I made 10 minutes before it. But yeah, I mean, look, Gabriel Davis, like, we've seen him have success against the Kansas City Chiefs. We go back to that playoff game, obviously, where he had the master game, as you mentioned, right? But the usage has been there for him. He's played on 95% of snaps in 3 out of 4 games. That the last week's blowout, it was the one game that he didn't. And hey now, just while I'm talking, got an alert on the Fantasy Life app. Raheem Mostert, Durham Smythe, back practicing at Dolphins Thursday practice.
There you go. Fire him up.
Yeah.
Fire up Raheem the Dream.
I don't think Durham Smythe is necessary to grab, but good to know that Mostert is practicing in full, it appears. Anyway, my point is on Gabe Davis. We know the talent is there. We saw it last week. The 2 great catches in the long runs. He had 3 catches overall. We've seen it previously as well in the playoff game last year against the Chiefs. What are we expecting this week against Kansas City once again? Worth noting, Chiefs have allowed 7 touchdowns to wide receiver. That's tied for the 3rd most in the NFL.
Yep, I think that Gabe Davis certainly, there were a lot of reasons the previous 2-3 weeks. There were a lot of caveats. There was the weather in Baltimore. The Miami game was weird where they were selling out to stop the receivers, so Devin Singletary went off. I think he can safely fire up Gabe Davis probably for the rest of the season and certainly for this week. Now,
Chiefs have allowed the 5th most receptions to opposing wide receivers as well.
And there's going to be a lot of points in that game.
Yeah.
We saw what happened in the playoffs. Those teams cannot stop each other. They're both just defense agnostic. All right, Zach Ertz at Seattle. He's had a minimum of 6 receptions in 4 straight games, and he's kind of becoming your stable of guys who's just frequently on this list every week.
Maybe. I keep hoping that he'll sort of break through and make it. He makes the love list this week because not only has he been really good this year, he's had multiple red zone targets in 4 out of 5 games this year. So I think he gets in the end zone here. I like him as a anytime touchdown bet. And I certainly like him against Seattle, as the Seahawks have allowed the most yards to opposing tight ends. Like they just give it up. Start your tight ends against the Seahawks.
Yeah. The Detroit Lions looked like they were going to be the fantasy team, just both sides, and they didn't want it, and so now it is Seattle. All right, some others receiving votes. We've got Christian Kirk, Jakobi Meyers, Curtis Samuel, a couple of Georges, Pickens and Kittle, and then Hayden Hurst.
So I'll just mention Kirk real quick, who had 2 touchdowns in Week 2 against New Orleans.
Against the Colts.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, against what I would say, New Orleans. Sorry. Christian Kirk had the big game in Week 2 against the Colts, right? He had the 2 touchdown passes. Colts struggle against the slot. They allow the 5th most yards after the catch per reception to the slot. So Kirk comes in as a top 20 play for me this week. Jakobi Meyers, as we've talked about, this is, again, one of those ones that would surprise you. So far this year, he's the 8th best wide receiver in fantasy on a points-per-game basis, averaging 9 targets a game. So there's a nice floor there with Jakobi Meyers. With no Jahan Dotson tonight. We're going to talk about this game in a little bit, but Curtis Samuel, I think, is somebody that I do think is worthy of starting. He's had 6 or more receptions in 4 out of 5 games this year, leads the team in target share at 22%. And finally, we keep waiting for a George Kittle breakout game. I think this is it. If it's not this, then we're trading George Kittle, and we're just like, if he can't get it done against the Falcons, that is bottom 3 in the NFL in terms of most receptions and yards allowed to opposing tight ends, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yep.
So I think it's a George Kittle week here for pass catchers.
Yeah, I think if he doesn't play well this week, I think that's the time to trade George Kittle, because he, like DeAndre Hopkins, he still has all of the name brand value of being George Kittle. All right, let's jump into the hate list. First guy is Mike Williams playing against Denver.
Yeah, I mean, we're expecting Patrick Surtain to shadow him as well. Chance that Keenan Allen comes back, which would limit his target share. And it's worth noting that the Denver Broncos have allowed the 2nd fewest yards to wide receivers this season. They've given up only 1 touchdown to a wide receiver so far this year, and that's as currently constructed. And if they suddenly get some reinforcements here, I don't know. He makes me nervous. You probably still have to start Mike Williams, Jay.
Yeah.
Right? I'm at wide receiver 20, but given how productive he's been recently, that's pretty low for me.
That is the Mike Williams experience.
Yeah.
Where he's going to have those random 1 reception games.
And I've been clear about this. If you have Mike Williams on your roster, you just have to start him and close your eyes. And you can't try to guess which is a good week. And yet here I am doing that. But I do think it's a down week for Mike Williams. I would lower expectations for BMW, Big Mike Williams. Again, you're probably starting him as a high-end flex, low-end wide receiver, too.
I still think Jalen Ramsey, despite high-profile failures, is probably the best cornerback in the league, but Patrick Surtain is playing like it
terrific
right now. Now, Jerry Jeudy in that game as well. He is another kind of frequent recurring guest on the hate list, and he makes it again.
They keep starting him. People keep arguing with me, okay? He's had 4 or fewer receptions in every game this year. His 48% catch rate is 4th lowest among all wide receivers. So it's okay. What are you doing here, right? Right? He's had 4 fewer receptions in every game this year, hasn't hit 55 yards in a game since week 1. Not a lot of touchdown equity here. Oh, by the way, Russell Wilson looks terrible, and apparently he's hurt. So,
Jerry Jeudy's played 31 games in his career. He's gotten to 80 receiving yards 3 times in 31 games. And everyone wants to blame it on the quarterbacks, but it's not like Teddy Bridgewater's that bad, and Russell Wilson hasn't been great either, but still Russell Wilson.
We might be talking about him next week, next segment on Quarterback Love Hate. You'll never guess which list Russell Wilson is on.
Yeah.
Back after this.
Yeah, hate, minus 500 favorite.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.